Welcome to the Cookbook, where we invite guests on to share the ingredients of what has helped make them the successes that they are. All of it, the good, the not so good. You're not going to find anything half-baked here. And our kitchen gets messy sometimes. That's when the fun starts. So come on and join us. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Cookbook. I'm your host, Iris Goldfeder, and I am so freaking excited about my guest today, Sarah Dowd. Sarah and I met, she heard me speaking on Diane Wingert's podcast, ADHD-ish, and the rest is history. And speaking of history, you're going to hear a lot about that today. Sarah is an entrepreneur with 5 freaking businesses, and we're going to talk about that as well. And she's just an all-around awesome person. So without further ado, let's meet Sarah. Hey there.
Hi, Iris. How are you?
I am awesome. I feel like we talk every day now. So
we pretty much do, actually. Yeah. So, I don't think you're wrong on that one.
No, I know. I'm so excited because, just with all of the things that you're doing, and they all kind of intersect with each other, right? So, you have Tricolor, and then you have Les Raconteurs that you just started. You have the podcast that you're starting. You have, I don't even think I know the other 2 businesses, but anyway, she's got like a lot of shit going on. So tell us a little bit about yourself to start, and then we'll do the thing.
Go from there. All right, cool. So I'm Sarah Dowd, and I am the founder of 5 different sort of businesses, enterprises, dreams. My most established brand is called the Tricolor Collective, and we are based out of the UK, although we do work all across Europe and Canada and the United States. And we specialize in arts, heritage, culture, philanthropy, and essentially designing projects and kind of products that are going to get people excited to give money, or to give money, spend money, etc. And so we work with museums, we work with galleries, castles. I've worked with some of the coolest places in the UK. I've worked with historic royal palaces, for example. So which is the organization that runs the Tower of London. I've used to work for the Imperial War Museum. And I feel incredibly privileged to be able to work in an industry where we are actively trying to make sure that people engage, but also appreciate their heritage, everybody else's heritage, the culture that creates our histories, and to sort of try and turn back the tide of people thinking, oh, history is boring. History, that's just stuff I learned in school and I had a really dry teacher. And what we're trying to do is completely switch that on its head. So I've been doing that with Tricolor for the last 15 years. And we have as a team, we have raised 200 million pound sterling. So that is the equivalent of about 300 million US dollars in funding for these kinds of projects. And it's been a roller coaster. I started Tricolor in 2010, so just after the sort of global recessionary crisis, and I went, hey, what a brilliant time to start your own business. Okay.
And then what made you start it? Like what was the catalyst or the impetus that, made you go, I'm going to start this business and raise a shit ton of money for all of these
great places. So what made me start it was, as I know now, I was diagnosed with ADHD earlier this year, just before my 47th birthday. But I've always had a little bit of a rebellious streak, and I don't really like being told what to do. I'm really, really good at customer service as a result. So it's like, don't tell me what to do, but I'll make sure that you don't have to tell me what to do, kind of thing.
Right.
Which is quite nice. So we bring a really good North American style customer service to Europe, which is, I think, a lot of people find quite refreshing.
Yes, it's needed.
And I started because I was working for a global construction company as their head of marketing, and I'd done a few different sort of marketing, product development, comms, PR roles, but what I actually found myself doing that was the best was I used to respond to RFPs. I got paid really good money for it. And I would do these big RFPs for like major multi-billion pound contracts. And I just loved the creativity of that. But at the same token, I had done a fair amount of work in the charitable sector and the sort of nonprofit sector. I started out my career at Stephen Thomas Associates, hey guys, in Toronto, Canada's leading direct marketing nonprofit fundraising firms. And I give it to Steve and Mary and Paula. And Liz, they gave me my start. And I sort of grew from there. And I knew that, well, maybe not new, but I had this feeling that I was sort of pulling together this weird kind of mixture of skills and experience that it sort of allowed me an into the sort of visitor attraction world, we'll call it, in a sort of like, I know how to get you big money, not just little money. And I know how to do that because I'm really good at listening to audiences. I'm really good at listening to what people sort of tell me in terms of their vision and be able to kind of make these creative connections. Again, I've called that my sort of beautiful mind moment. I can see stuff in my head where it sort of all comes together. And I think actually that is down to the ADHD, and I just didn't know it at the time. Yeah. And I was just able to translate these stories, this narrative, into something that was really inspiring to people, that they wanted to give 10 million pounds or, they wanted to support a new skills and training program. And I was really lucky because I'd done 2 years at the Imperial War Museum on a 10 million pound project where I was sort of the head of communications. And I loved traveling all around the UK to the 72 different venues that we were working with. And I was doing a lot of training, and my job was just to get people inspired and enthused about stuff. And that really is what it comes down to. I think that there can be a lot of cynicism in our world today. I haven't really seen it get any better in the last 15 years. It's certainly, there is a cynicism in British culture as well, that actually, when you're trying to get people to invest, whether it's $1 or whether it's $100 million, it's a hearts and mind situation. Yeah. You're building a relationship. You're getting them to believe in you, in the organization that you're standing for, and that you can tell that story. So I started the Tricolor way back then with the opportunity to sort of do some freelancing for the construction company, but also start doing some other things in my own right. And we sort of started to build it from there. And it wasn't easy. I started it with my husband. And for the first couple of years, we were both freelancing for it. I will say we got married in 2011, came back from our honeymoon, and we both had 2 big clients. And within 10 days of each other and returning from our honeymoon, it's this 2010, so the economy was just tanking. We lost both of our clients within 10 days of each other.
Oh,
Yeah.
shit.
And so we were like, okay, we have got a $3,000 equivalent mortgage, or I think it's probably more than that, more like 4,000, and no income, and a business that, when you, of course, you start a business, it naturally creates its own money drain as well, even if you're doing nothing with it.
Right.
You
True.
know, so
monthly expenses, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. And so what we decided to do was we sold the house really quickly and we downsized. And that was a big emotional impact for me. It was the first house I'd ever bought with my own money. And that felt like the failure that I'd always in the back of my mind kind of had been fighting against. And again, now that I know about my ADHD diagnosis, that voice is very identifiable, and it's a hell of a lot quieter now, which I think is great. But it was at that moment in time, I didn't know any of this. And I just felt like, fuck, what am I going to do? Sorry, I hope I'm allowed to swear on this podcast.
Have you met me? I mean,
yeah, I know. Just thought I checked. No,
you're good. And now my friend Michelle just took a sip of wine. So every time we say fuck on now she took 2 sips.
Well, this is one of the reasons I reached out to you, of course, was
I know
you talked about the fuck jar, and I went, I want to work with somebody who's got a fuck jar.
There it is.
There it is. With all the fucks you have to give.
With all the fucks and days that I have none, I just empty the jar and leave it on the counter.
Yeah.
What I'll say about the ADHD thing, because you said, you picture everything in your head. You saw Queen's Gambit, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when she's laying in bed and all the chess pieces are moving, that's what I do. Like so I was assessed as a strategic listener. So when somebody is talking to me, a client, I'm listening to hear, because a lot of people listen to talk, which we know is wrong. But I listen to hear, and then the back of my brain is already putting all the pieces together. And I think that is the ADHD piece. And I think that that's our superpower. Like we were talking about that it's not, ADHD is not a bad thing. I think ADHD is a superpower because it allows us to see everything. And where we get overwhelmed by that sometimes, it really helps our clients because we get to see everything. And so, but, with that, with selling the house and, all of that, that wasn't a failure, that,
I know that now, but it took me a long time to deal with that. And it really, there was a lot of anger, a lot of kind of, feeling that there is a lack of justice and how unfair things were. And that I think has probably been one of my biggest evolutions over the last 15 years is, and I had no idea what justice sensitivity was until this year either. And I can see it, but really understanding that, one, life ain't fair. And that's unfortunate. Life is hard. Get a helmet. And the other part that has really helped me, and I really sort of doubled down on it in the pandemic, was trying to. I'm not as worried about what clients think of me anymore. And what I want them to see is a human being, a smart human being that can help them. And that I want them to feel like they can be a smart human being with me. So I really, when pandemic hit and all visit attractions, all arts, culture, heritage museums, it all shut. And there was nothing going. And I thought, this is it. This is where we go under. I kind of went, well, what can I do? I wasn't sleeping particularly well. That's one of my things. And I just sort of went, okay, how can I help? And I went on and did different sort of online seminars, and I just reached out to as many people as I knew. I did freebie stuff that never came back to help, and I never expected it. And I just went, how can I help? And as a result of that, Tricolor won the Museum and Heritage Awards, which are sort of, they're international actually. Right. Museum and Heritage Awards 2021 or 2022, I can't remember. Supplier of the Year. And it was the first time they'd ever had an award category like that. And it was a public vote as well, which was fun. And we won it. And I was so damn proud, because that for me, it wasn't the survival that really meant stuff to me in this sort of scenario. It was the fact that I know that I helped some of those organizations survive. I know that I helped some of those people in those organizations survive. In Britain, they had a thing called furlough, where the government would pay a certain amount of sort of percentage of salary and to the organization, but people had to stay at home and they couldn't work. So what happened in a lot of the organizations I work with is that in order to get as much money as they could, they furloughed everybody, and except maybe the chief exec or a few people on the senior management team. Or in some cases I saw, smaller charities, they furloughed everybody, including the general managers and the chief exec. And suddenly you've got a bunch of volunteer trustees having to do all the actual work. Wow. And the stress that they were all under, that it was just, I had people crying on my shoulders. It was just an opportunity to say, right, I sound like Fraser Crane, but I'm listening. And let's just talk. And that kind of attitude is what I've tried to sort of really stick with in the last 5 years. It's to say, I don't want to just get down to business. I want you to feel like you can talk to me like another human being. And that to me is what develops relationships. It develops trust, and people buy in to, what you're all about. And that's sort of really where I focus, sort of the values side of Tricolor. And that's sort of been our growth. We're not a huge company. We have about 20 odd people who work for us, and we turn over probably about 1.8 million USD a year. And in our sector, that's massive. And it's our sector is quite low margin as well. So it's not like I'm going to be able to retire anytime soon. And that's fine. If what it can do is allow me to do things like the podcast, History for Fuck's Sake, coming out. I know. I wanted to talk about that. October 21st. Yeah. So if it allows me to do those kinds of things, which it has, then we're winning. We're winning all around.
Yeah. And I, and I'm gonna ask you a question in a second, because there's a perfect lead into it. But the fact that the pandemic did a lot of things to a lot of different companies. So, for me, it actually expanded my business, because I became not just local, I became national, because everybody was online. Mm-hmm. So, nobody was leaving the house, and I sure as hell wasn't leaving my house, because I couldn't control what everybody here was. It was way different here than it was there. Mm-hmm. And so it made me a national agency, and it allowed me to really figure out the pivot that I wanted to make, because we just did like websites and SEO. And then it was like, wait a minute, other clients needed more than that. So I took all of my expertise and just said, okay, well, then let's just make it all-in-one marketing solutions. This way they don't have to deal with 20 different people, especially during the pandemic. It was like, if you're working with 5 different contractors and they're not talking to each other, you don't know what the hell is going on with your project. But if when you work with us, you deal with me or, my, our executive director. But regardless, what's going on at all times. And that was, the pivot that we made. So, because we were allowed to leave our homes and, which we're not going to get into that. So, but, so through all of that, people that are listening to this are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs. What advice would you have for somebody who's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur?
My advice is, actually, if you're neurodivergent, it's really good, because what you have to be is agile and be able to think about things differently. It's anyone who thinks that they're gonna make $1 million overnight. These are not get rich quick schemes at all. No. Most small businesses, business startups, etc., fail within their first 3 years. So my business, we grew our business what's called bootstrapping, and it means that you don't have like capital investment from venture capitalists or Dragon's Den or anything like that. You just don't. You don't have that. You win one piece of work and you try and make a profit, and you win another piece of work and you try and make a profit, and hopefully you get to a point where you're getting enough volume in that you can give up your day job or your big side hustle or whatever, and you're working it. And what it's done is, we've been around for 15 years, and it's, as I said, it's allowed me to start, several other businesses. But I'm not kind of deluding myself that I'm going to be the next multinational company. So what I would say is that, if you've got like an MBA, or you think that you need an MBA to do anything like this, no. What you need is work ethic. And
yes,
that's the critical issue. And what I would say is that from what I think, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if you reflected this as well. One of the things I would say that if you are a business owner is, don't get into doing stuff you don't know how to do on your own. Okay. I can do every single service that Tricolor offers, even now. And, we have, quite a few. I can do every single one of them myself. From Her Majesty's Treasury Green Book business cases, which are highly technical, business planning, investment documents, financial modeling, down to designing, posters. I can do it. And I think that is the ADHD. I also think, it's something, I have an artistic streak, which is nice. And I would say that it's the kind of traditional model of you work off of other people making a profit. You'll only get to that when you get to a place where you can scale. And we have tried to scale 3 times. And it's only been in the last 5 years that actually we've been able to do it. So we have scaled before and had to draw in our horns, and scaled again and had to draw in our horns. And finally, we've managed to find that sort of sweet spot where we've been able to do it successfully. But yeah, I'd say, being an entrepreneur is fantastic, especially if you don't like having a boss. But on the flip side, if you're in a service, suddenly all your clients are your bosses. Okay. So I would suggest make sure you really understand yourself and what makes you tick, the emotional labor that goes into that kind of stuff. If you're, if you're starting something with a product, that's great. Figure out how that product can scale or not scale, and how it's still, don't lose your joy. Like, if you're going to become an entrepreneur, you've got to have some fun, because if you're not having fun, then it's a hell of a lot of work, oftentimes with not a lot of return. And it's, you get the return by having the fun. So yeah, that's the kind of the advice I'd give to somebody thinking about doing it. Do it, but make sure that you're really clear on what you're doing and how you're going to do it.
Yeah. I love that. And it's like, like you were saying with the, they're not going to make $1 million. I always say, like, an overnight success takes 10 years. And I think also that, if you, I say this all the time too, if you really want to get to know yourself, become an entrepreneur, because you are going to learn all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, the pretty, the happy, the sad, the holy shit, what was I thinking moment, right? You're going to go through it all. And at the end of the day, I think the strong win. If you're strong enough to get through it all, then.
Absolutely. And I have I can't claim that this is mine. I don't know where I've picked it up from, but it's something that I really believe in. And it's something that actually has gotten me. People sometimes scoff, but others are like, actually, I can go with that. And it's this phrase that everything has always been impossible until it wasn't. And that's what history teaches you.
Yes.
It was impossible that the internet would ever exist. It was impossible that, we put somebody on the moon. It was impossible. It was impossible that we were going to speak to each other between the UK and the US on a telephone. And then it wasn't. And that's the thing. And I'm very conscious of always being very careful about what defining progress means, because progress often comes at a loss for somebody else. But I'm also a big believer of going, we are incredibly creative as a species, and there will always be an answer. It might not be easy, and it might not be achievable because of certain parameters, legal, political, etc. But there is always a solution. It's a case of how do you work that solution in a way over 10 years to say, hey, what was totally impossible 10 years ago has now become possible. And that's really inspired me with, fuck it, let's do it. Let's go and let's start a new business such as Les Raconteurs, which is French for the storytellers. And this is my new story sourcing, creative packaging, IP licensing, and sort of development company for multi-channel experiences. So everything from digital immersive to live in real life experiences. So where you mix, theater, real life, digital, to working with some of the biggest, global, immersive brands, to developing, concepts and story narratives for new series, on some of our most popular streamers. And, 10 years ago, I would have gone, oh God, no, I can't, I need to stick within your lane, stay in your lane, Sarah, stay in your lane. And my lane was,
but you have so many lanes, and this is creative, right?
Yes.
And you are just huge on creativity. And before we get into Les Raconteurs, what I really want to do is talk about your podcast, because,
sure,
this to me is, it's the connection to all of the history. And so her new podcast is called History for Fuck's Sake. There's a launch party on October 7th, and the podcast is launching October 21st. And it is this it's embracing history and showing how history can be cool rather than being afraid of our history. Because at the end of the day, if we don't embrace our history, then history repeats itself. And as we can see in the US right now, I'm sorry, bad shit's going on. And that's because people are afraid to look at the history. And you have to look at history. History happened for a reason. It happened so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. However, history is also amazing and fascinating. And her podcast is just that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I love it. Like, I have a behind the scenes look because we're helping launch it, but holy crap, it's just so cool.
So I've wanted to do a podcast for about the last sort of 3-4 years. And for me, what I needed to get to was a point where I brought all the different intersections of that beautiful mind moment together. And the thing that did it for me was, and I'll be really open and honest with people, being an entrepreneur is also deeply depressing sometimes. And, last year was not a great year. I lost some family members last year, and it was really that really brought a lot of stuff home to me. And so I was in a pretty dark place in sort of the end of last year. And I thought, a good friend of mine actually said, Sarah, you gotta have some fun. You're not enjoying what you're doing at the moment, because I was trying to balance, my family commitments with dealing with the death of my uncle and supporting my aunt and dealing with all that. And I was just found everything so very much at that moment. And I kind of went, how do I get some joy back in this? And I started thinking about the things I really like. I really, really like the movies. All right. I really like film. I really love reading. I'm interested. Did community theater directing. I'm very into actually like performative arts as well. And I thought to myself, and this is my sort of PR background as well. It's like, what happens at 2:00 in the morning when you're still awake, Sarah, and it's in the dark and that shining rectangle is in front of your face? What are you doing? And I did it sort of like, well, I'm going down the rabbit hole here. And I'm like, okay, well, where's the white rabbit taking you? Okay. And what are you finding interesting? And I started just copying links to different things. So the fact that it's, the 50th anniversary of Bohemian Rhapsody this year, the fact that I'm reading a book by Glynis McNichol. In fact, I'll show it to you. I really, 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 really want Glynis to come on my podcast, because Glynis, this is all.
If you hear this, get on her podcast.
Yeah, this is called "I'm Mostly Here to Enjoy Myself: One Woman's Pursuit of Pleasure in Paris," and it's all about her experience of going to live in Paris for a month. Just at the end of 2021, in sort of the end of the pandemic, and I just started collecting all these kind of stories and things that, particularly from pop culture, that I was going, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. My husband collects what he calls band names and random things like I think he's got one that's called like Tarantula Jelly or something like that. And I just started collecting bizarre stories. And I thought, there's something in this. And I was mulling it over. And I thought to myself, one of the things that really can get my goat sometimes is, and I don't know whether it's the same in the US or not, but certainly I have seen in Britain people who work in the arts versus people who work in museums or what they call heritage can sometimes see themselves as very, very different. And I've had people who work in the arts going, oh, well, we don't really know much about heritage or history, or, that's really not our thing. That's, that's for academics, and I've seen people in heritage going, yes, but, our job is to preserve and conserve objects and artifacts and stories for perpetuity. Our role is to keep things. And it's often sort of, there's this kind of a weird paradox between the two of them, because I've always said, but you're talking about a circle, okay? Because your arts and culture and theater and writing and filmmaking and podcasting and making music and all of these things that essentially for most people is not work, but some of us are lucky enough to make it into work, into careers. That's our culture. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward 5 years, that's our history. That's our heritage. So it's a circle. And I really felt like that was a message that needed to be told. And how was I going to do that? I thought, well, I want to identify some of the bigger themes. So season 1 of History for Fuck's Sake is all loosely connected. And I am giving away a little Easter egg here, although it's not that difficult to put it together, is all loosely connected around, it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War.
Right.
And so I then looked at other anniversaries this year. So we mentioned Bohemian Rhapsody. It's also the 40th anniversary of the movie Back to the Future. Well, what does Back to the Future got to do with history? Well, they go back to 1955. Okay,
exactly.
And it's about one guy's family history. They reference Chuck Berry in, so they're referencing, quite a lot of cultural history in it. They're also telling a story of, a make-believe town in, I think it's in California, if memory serves. And it's very meta in sort of, and complex and layered. And I thought, well, wouldn't this be a fun thing to do, is talk about the movie Back to the Future, but let's talk about it with somebody who wasn't even alive when Back to the Future came out 40 years ago. And by the way, right, they only went back 30 years from 85 to 55, whereas now we're talking about 40 years. And, you try to think about if we went back to 85 in comparison to now, how would that feel? And so I had Louisa Rogers on my podcast, who's a fashion professor at Northumbria University. And we started talking about trends, and we started talking about looking at Back to the Future through the eyes of sort of teen culture and what teen culture means now, or Gen Z culture means now. And then what do Gen Z look at in terms of what do they define as history? And what she's fascinating, talking about how actually, as what's quite big at the moment is references to Y2K. So like 1995 to 2005 is a popular kind of trending thing for Gen Z audiences. And I find I'm just that kind of boggles my mind. And so we were then able to talk about that and how do people define their own contemporary culture and fashions, etc., in the context of their own histories, or actually, in this case, kind of fraudulent histories, because some of the fashions of that period were referencing a lot of 70s fashion. So it's layers upon layers upon layers. And that's kind of the message that I'm trying to get across to people, is like, just look a little deeper. Think a little bit more and make the connections. And I directed a play called Educating Rita. There was a film made in the early 80s with Michael
Oh,
Caine.
yeah. Yep.
And it's a wonderful two-hander play. And there's a whole discussion around, only connect, and the sort of the literary criticism and the thinking about what does it mean? What are the stories in these books mean for Rita? And that's sort of something that I really encourage is, we can take so many things at face value now, scrolling through our social media, watching TV, numbing ourselves, that actually just take a moment to connect a thought between that to that to that. And so I describe the podcast History for Fuck's Sake. It's like the game, the six degrees of Kevin Bacon, but for history. It's like, how do all these things connect? And, it doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong to the connection. They're just the connections that I'm thinking about, my guests are thinking about, and kind of going, oh, cool. That's neat. And, that's what I hope other people will do, is just don't just accept the drugs. Think a little bit and think about what you're consuming. Think about people's voices. Think about alternate voices, and I mean that in all the positive ways, that you can do that. And that's what I really hope that, if I can help anybody just get a little bit more interested in history through a really bizarre connection, that they go, oh, I'll have a listen to that. Then
I don't think it's bizarre. I think the way that everything is connected is done pretty brilliantly, to be honest. I mean, I've seen a few of the episodes, and I think that each different guest's perspective on what the episode is about, I think it's brilliant. I think it's going to be amazing.
And I want it to be sort of multi-sensory as well. So, we can listen to the episode, you can watch the episode, but I also recommend sort of other books. I always do an Apple Music or Spotify playlist. So when I was a kid, I still remember this. I used to drive along with my mom, and she'd have the radio on, and I'd be listening, and I'd be like, oh, that would look, I could imagine it. I could imagine the scene in the movie that soundtrack would work really well for.
Yep.
And I'm really trying to sort of roll with that as well with the podcast. It's like every time we're talking about these, these connections, these esoteric connections, I'm also thinking about the soundtrack. So each episode comes with its own recommended soundtrack. So for example, I've got one episode that's all about the 60th anniversary of the film The Sound of Music, with an amazing Canadian orchestral conductor, music director, cultural leader who lives in the UK now. He's an amazing fundraiser as well. And his name is Robin Thomas. And what the Spotify playlist I've put together is all of the pop culture or rock bands, etc., that have sampled or referenced The Sound of Music in their work. And you'd be amazed. It covers everything from like Outkast to I think Pink might have done something.
Holy crap.
And yeah, and forgive me if I've just done that wrong. You'll have to listen to the podcast and look at the show notes in order to get the list. But it's again, I'm trying to give that sort of those different layers for people to go, I enjoyed that. Now I'm going to go and listen to some really awesome music as a part of it. And I'm kind of like trying to create a soundtrack for people's day if they're going to listen.
I really like that idea. And The Sound of Music, I'm going to give my age away, but everybody knows. We actually saw it in the theater when it came out. And when we got back to my house, my mom and I, because she had an amazing voice, I never did anything with it, but we got back to the house and started harmonizing to Do Re Mi. And that's what got me into music at like 6, 7 years old, however old I was. And it's so funny because when I hear, references to that, it just brings me back to that. Like I remember sitting on the plastic covered yellow velour couch, and then, going through that. So I think the other thing that, history does is it also brings back memories for us from that time, especially if you have a soundtrack to that, because music always brings back memories. So
it's music and the sense of smell. So I've got one episode that's all about perfume and nostalgia. So it's the 100th year anniversary of the perfume Shalimar, and came out in 1925. And so myself and my guest Valerie, we talk about the evocative nature of smell. We look a little bit at sort of what happened to like the French perfume houses in the Second World War, and how that's those smells. But Shalimar, interestingly enough, is also one of the most quoted like perfume brands in culture. So, it's mentioned in umpteen different movies, books, etc., because it's recognizable. And so, yeah, music, smell, fashion, filmmaking. We talk about, I've got an amazing friend of mine, Gaz Brown, who's a vocal coach, who's also a Gulf War veteran. And we talk about the ability for the arts to heal people. And I think our world needs a lot of healing at the moment. And yet there's a lot of really bad stuff going on to, take those organizations that can and those activities that help healing. And I think sports does the same thing. I categorize sports as part of culture. Yep. It is part of our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
And so it's not, this isn't, don't worry for everyone who's going, oh, I can't bear all the arty farty stuff. It's like, don't worry. We've got stuff about sports as well. My dad played rugby for Canada, so we come from that family. My brother's a massive hockey fan, of course, being Canadian. I am a baseball fan. So Toronto Blue Jays, that I was there for both wins of the World Series in the 90s. So
damn, where's my Yankees hat? I should have worn my Yankees hat just to kind of,
So yeah, I just want, culture gives people hope, and history can be terrifying and sad and desperate and innovative, but actually what it tells is a story of survival. It is a story of hope, and that what we shouldn't do is, go gently into this good night. We shouldn't just accept, this too shall pass. But, we gotta look at how we made a difference as a species, how we made a difference as people, and our culture. It's through our cultures,
Yeah. And looking at the fact that this is the 80th anniversary of World War II, what blows my mind is where we are right now. And, and we talked about this. I was in Germany a year ago, March, and we went to Dachau. We were supposed to go so there was supposed to be an English speaking tour. And when we got there, it was canceled. And, my wife looked at me and she was like, well, now what? And I was like, clearly the universe wants us to do as much as we can do. Because if you go on a guided tour, you have to, do the guided tour, right? So we went into the administration building, which is now just a bunch of placards with information on all the history and how the National Socialist Party came to power. And so I'm in there reading this, and there's this French gay couple on the other side, which is like hilarious. because they're, talking about all these different things. And then they said something that literally chilled me to the bone. And that was that, and the Americans are letting it happen there. To hear that, standing in Dachau was probably the most chilling thing that I've ever experienced. And we left the administration building, and then we went into the prisoners' barracks. And it was a really rainy, cold day, and we were going to go further down. And then my wife looked at each other, and we went, "We've seen enough." Like, my soul couldn't literally bear to go down. I really wanted to go to the memorials, but along the wall, like along the back end are all the memorials. And then right to the left is the crematorium. And I couldn't, I was just like, I can't. So we left. And I think of things now with, Alligator Alcatraz, which, is now being dismantled, thank God. And the fact that, they're trying to be clever with the names. It's not a fucking joke. Alligator Alcatraz, it's not funny. And I don't, didn't really want to get political, but there's just, with this being the 80th anniversary, I think it's really important. In Indiana, they're building a concentration camp. They want to call it, I forgot what it was, like Speedway something. And the, Indy Speedway was like, no, don't use our name. But they don't care. They're using it anyway. So, if we don't, and this is why I think history is so important, if we shy away from it, if we don't look at it, as much as it hurts, as much as we don't want to look at it, we have to look at it, because if we don't look at it, we're just going to repeat the same mistakes. And that's what we're doing right now. And it's just really hard.
You said something really poignant there that I think is very much worth sort of reiterating, is how did the National Socialist Party come into being? They were voted in. They were voted in. They were a government party. And what happened was, we, as human beings, there is a sense that the checks and balances will work. Process, which is what checks and balances are, only works if the people behind them have the gravitas and the moral fiber to say no. And it's a very common story that you look at Cambodia, look at Pol Pot's regime. Millions of people killed, teachers, artists, advocates. You take away the people who say no through pacifist means, and the checks and balances stop working.
Right.
And you have to look back, because if you only look forward, okay, you don't know what's creeping up behind you. Because you don't know that this has happened before. Right. And everyone will say, oh, totally different situation. We're all people, and our brains have, physiologically, biologically, chemically, have not changed in 100,000 years. Please don't write in and tell me that I got those numbers wrong. But the point is, in terms of the time frame of our known history and all the things that we as human beings have done to each other, our brains haven't changed. Okay. We are the same species.
Yep.
We just have a lot more tools now. And what those tools do in some cases is they divide people. sometimes they bring them together. Find your tribe on social media. That's wonderful. But also they divide people so that actually you don't hear the voices. So they divide people and you don't hear the voices of concern, of dissatisfaction, of challenge. And it's not just history that does that. It's culture, it's arts, it's people saying, I'm going to have a think about this. And sometimes that's challenging. And, it's not all, and this is not a liberal nor a conservative conversation.
No, not at all.
This is a human being conversation.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important that people stop anesthetizing themselves. It's really, really hard these days. I think back to you're neurodiverse, I'm neurodiverse, and the way that our society has become and the addictive nature of our technology as well it's soma for the masses. It's Aldous Huxley. And we have to just take a beat and do not go gently into that good night. Fight against the dying of the light, Dylan Thomas.
It's funny because, I'm woo, and my friend Jennifer said something really amazing. And I've said this a couple of times, but you can't fight darkness with light because the dark feeds off of fighting. So all that does is it feeds off of it and it makes the darkness stronger. But as light workers or people of light, if we just peek our heads in every once in a while and put a little bit of love in there, a little bit of love, a little bit of light, a little bit of kindness and empathy, eventually that dark gets filled with the light. And I'm not saying, when they go low, we go high. To me, that's bullshit because there's no depths to the low that certain people will go to. So I think that, when they go low, you have to go as low, if not lower. And I can't even believe that I'm saying that right now. But, you can't bring a knife to a gunfight. Yeah. It doesn't work.
So I think it's a really interesting metaphor talking about light versus darkness. I mean, darkness is the absence of light. Yes. It doesn't eat light. It isn't light. And I think it's difficult sometimes, and I think people can have an approach that over intellectualizes things. And what I would say is we have to be human and we have to understand each other. And I am a massive fan of The Rest is Politics US, The Rest is Politics UK, Catty K, Anthony Scaramucci, love you. And it's listening to them talk about actually what different, maybe more successful bodies, for lack of a better word, out there, whether that's groups of people, organizations, individuals, etc. Those that really understand the human psychology of things, they're the ones that are winning. And to deny and to refuse to really try and get to the heart of what is bothering people, what is making people vote in these ways, what's causing the rise of populism,
people not listening.
it's not connecting to each other.
Right.
It's really hard to hate your neighbor, even if they're on a totally different political spectrum to you, if actually you like them as a human being, because you might go, I don't agree with that, but
Yes.
you're fucking hilarious. Okay. I could have a really good laugh. Let's have a beer. Let's agree to disagree agreeably. Okay. And that's, and I will listen. And that, I think, is one of the things that we need to do much more of, particularly in the liberal sphere, is we need to bloody well listen. And we need to listen to people who are not of our political persuasion, because I think that the post-war period has, particularly in the global north, in the US, in the UK, in Canada, we have the wealth has, just exponentially grown, but it's on the back of people who have been left behind. And that protest of we are here and nobody's listening, that is what is driving the darkness, because these poor people, and that sounds very patronizing and I don't mean it to sound like that, but a lot of these people are in the darkness, and it wasn't a darkness that they brought on themselves, I
was just reading something that, and I know that we're at an hour already, but we can go over for a little bit, but I was reading something somewhere that, a lot of politicians and a lot of companies pretty much were like, going into these rural areas or just areas in general and saying, this is what's good for you. And so we're going to do this without any feedback, without listening to the people. And you're 100% right. People weren't listening to each other. And, back in the day, it was like, oh, you should never talk politics and religion. Bullshit. Because if we were allowed to talk politics and religion, I don't think we would be where we are. I think that
I totally agree with that.
Right? Mm-hmm. There would have been like enough of a conversation where, this is my political stance. And we used to be able to have those conversations.
And why do they not want you to talk about it? Think about it. They don't want you to talk. They don't want you to talk about money. Okay. Because you'll realize the disenfranchisement of people and the sort of the total inequality that, money and power and organizations and, keeping people unaware of how unequal things are. They don't want you to talk about religion because, well, that's a massive source of power. All right. Yeah. And, and it fundamentally comes from this is a political system driven out of, medievalism, mercantilism, through the Industrial Revolution. Capitalism only came into being in the latter part of the 18th century.
Yeah.
Banks only came into being like 250, 300 years ago. Isn't that a crazy thought?
That is a crazy thought. Yeah.
That we have companies, capitalist companies, and I'm not against capitalism, by the way. As an entrepreneur, you kind of need to be.
Right.
But it is history. These things are only 300 years old. And now look where we are in the middle of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, it's interesting. And I am going to be one of hope because I have to be. Otherwise, I'll just crawl into a ball and hide in a hole. So, and that's not who I am. So, I'm
as the Dixie Chick said, you got to laugh sometimes. Or you're just going to cry your eyes out.
There you go. Right. I mean, so there you go. All right. Thank you so much for, we're over an hour and I knew we were easily going to go over an hour. I mean, we could talk, we do talk for a long time, but, thank you so much for, joining us and for sharing, your story, your wisdom, your heart and your soul. And I know we didn't get to all the businesses, so we're going to have you back on. Then we're going to talk about the other businesses.
That's great.
But I just really appreciate you taking time out of your evening because it's like dinner time where you are.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
So the last question that I ask all of my guests is, what lights your fire?
What lights my fire? So as much as I love to be agile and do different things and have my fingers in many, many pies, what lights my fire on an annual basis is the tradition of Thanksgiving. And in Canada, it means something slightly different. But I am a massive Fiddler on the Roof fan, and I could sing it. I've directed it before. I could sing it. And that sort of tradition of I always go home to Canada to be with my family for the second Monday in October. So I'm going to be doing the podcast launch party with my parents, who are both in their 70s and are still freaking rock stars. And I'm going to be doing that all from, the amazing North American autumn in October. That lights my fire. That's that touchstone of that's my personal history, and that refuels me coming back. Last year I had COVID during it, so that was really disappointing. So, but yeah, Thanksgiving and the tradition of coming together as in my little family unit of, we're all black sheep. That lights my fire.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. Hang on one second. I'm going to say goodbye and I'll be right back. Everybody, thank you again so much. I know I forgot to say it in the beginning. So like, share, subscribe, download, review. Please give this episode a review. If you've gleaned any golden nuggets, leave them in the comments. Would love to know what you might have gleaned from this episode. Really appreciate all of you listening and hanging in, usually for an hour plus. It means a lot. Don't forget, there's in the show notes, History for Fuck's Sake. Launch party is on October 7th, and the premiere of season 1 is going to be on October 21st. It's a phenomenal podcast. Sarah is a phenomenal host. Her guests are like off the hook this year. And so, go check it all out. And again, thank you for letting me do what I do. I love this. This is my passion project. And I appreciate you all for tuning in. So until next time, go out and find what lights your fire. See ya.